our last lecture for this season, and we will be here next fall, starting September. We usually do a film with a panel, and then we go on for our lectures. Okay. So, we have an email list over there. If you're not on our email list, if you want to sign up, please print clearly. Please like us on Facebook so we can get lots of friends. I think that's what they're called, right? Please give us a donation of $10 if you can't afford that. That's fine. We don't want to keep anybody away. And we do not take a bathroom break, but there is a bathroom here if you need it. And please turn off your cell phones. And we are recording tonight. So if you don't want to be recorded, if you have a question or something, just ask us to turn it off. Afterwards, Jason, turn it off. Thank you. Jason is going to come to the salon for a little bit. Yeah. It's at about a dozen of us meet usually after the lecture at the Mosaic Cafe on Masonic Street. We have tea and a little food and keep talking about the lecture, so if you want to come and do that. Penny, do you want to say a few words? Penny's doing a dream group this summer.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Penny or Penelope Tarasuk, and I'm going to start a dream group May 24th, and I'd appreciate if you take a little flyer and pass it on if to a friend or whatever. It'll be limited to 11, so I think it's going to be really dynamic. The last dream group I did lasted 11 years, so we could hope. But I think it's time. So those of you who would like to really delve in more to dream work and taste the power of a group in doing dream work. I'll be talking a little theory, but it will be an intimate experience, and it will be in South Deerfield, not here. So, and I can negotiate the fee, but I would really love to see at least 7 or 8, if not. And if there's a lot of interest, I might start one up again in the fall. But hey, thank you. And I'd like to say I've known Jason for many years, and I think you're in for a treat.
Okay. At the Boston Institute, they have a summer intensive, which is 3 days?
3 days, Thursday through Saturday.
Thursday through Saturday, June 22nd to the 24th, and the title is Meeting the Other Within and Without. You can say a couple words about that when you stand up.
Sure.
Okay. He has put it together, so. Okay, tonight we have Religious but Not Religious. The Need for a Symbolic Life with Jason Smith. And he's an analyst in Boston. He just got on the training board at the Boston Institute, and he does the summer intensive. And he started out as an actor in Canada. Interesting place to start. And how he got into Jung is he wanted to understand his characters, and he bumped into Jung and started reading. And then he went to Pacifica Graduate School in California, where he met his wife, and now the rest of the story is New England. And he's always, since a little boy, been fascinated with images and religions of the world, even though he grew up in a pretty secular household in his childhood. So let's welcome Jason Smith. And here are a few, if you really want to go to the intensive, I'm going to put a few Boston Institute things over here, brochures.
Thank you. Good evening. Let me start just a couple words about the summer intensive that we have at the Boston Institute. This is 3 days. There are 6 presenters, and they all are approaching this theme of meeting the other within and without, which as this was developing, it was right in the intensity and the heat of the election as that was happening, and that experience of who the other is and who we make into other was so intense, and it continues to be intense and painful, that it felt important to address that as a topic. So that's what we're doing. There are 6 presenters, and there's a range from looking at the other inside and encountering the other without in the world. So if you're interested in that, you can ask me about that later. And that's in June, so that's next month. So thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to present this material to you and engage in this discussion with you. I appreciate the invitation, and I have to say I appreciate the welcome. I've been really impressed with the way that this group has welcomed me, made sure I was comfortable, made sure that I knew the technical side of things, everything coming together. So I'm really appreciative of that. So I thought I would start. I'm gonna see if this works. Let's see how it goes. I thought I'd start with a little comic strip. This is Bloom County by Berkeley Breathed It, and it goes like this. This is Opus the Penguin. He's the everyman of this comic strip. And this is Oliver, who is the computer scientist. He's a computer genius and a scientist. And Opus is asked, he sees that Oliver looks tortured. You look tortured, Oliver. And Oliver is because the universe, the expansion of the universe is speeding up. It's speeding up. Says there's no explaining this in a logic-driven cosmos. None. Superman is more logical. So we rationalists had to cook up a bit of invisible fabulousness so we didn't go insane. And of course, Opus assumes that's God. But no, it's dark matter, because that explains everything. Thank God. So this is, I love this cartoon. We'll actually check in with Opus and Oliver a little bit later in the talk. But I love this. To me, epitomizes the religious but not religious, and it brings up a warning that Jung has. And this is in his work on Answer to Job. As he's introducing it, he says that when you're talking about religious symbolism, you need to be cautious. He says, whoever talks of such matters, religious symbolism, inevitably runs the risk of being torn to pieces by the two parties who are in mortal conflict about these very things. So when I tell people that I'm doing a talk called Religious but Not Religious, the religious people who have that sensibility, they like the first part of that. The not religious people are really relieved by the second part. So we're going to try and kind of hold that tension a little bit tonight. There's another warning that I want to share, and this is from a Buddhist sutra, and it's a fairly famous sutra in which the Buddha is describing to his monks the different ways that people approach the Dharma. And he says some monks, some men, they learn the Dharma, they don't examine the meaning of those teachings with wisdom. They don't gain a reflective acceptance of them. They don't experience the good for the sake of which they've learned it. They learn it for the sake of criticizing others and for winning in debates. And he says it's like someone who needs a snake. And seeking a snake, wandering in search of a snake, they see a large snake and grasp its coils or its tail. And it would turn back on him and bite his hand or his arm or one of his limbs, and because of that, he would come to death or deadly suffering. Why is that? Because of his wrong grasp of the snake. It says other people approach the Dharma, the answering of questions, the discourses, they examine the meaning of the teachings with wisdom. And they gain a reflective acceptance of them. They don't learn the Dharma for the sake of criticizing others or for winning in debates. They experience the good for the sake of which they learn it. And they grasp it properly. And it's conducive to their welfare and their happiness for a long time. And he says this is like someone who needs a snake. And they go in search of a snake, and they find a large snake, and they catch it with a cleft stick. And then having done so, they grab it by the neck. And then although the snake may wind its coils around them, around their arms or limbs, still they would not come to death or deadly suffering because of that, because of the right grasp of the snake. So this is the material we're talking about. We're talking about something as dangerous, as deadly, as potentially deadly as a snake. And it all depends on how you grasp it. Do you grasp it by the tail, or do you grasp it close to the neck, close to the head? One of for this talk, when I was thinking about it, the idea of religious but not religious is obviously a play on the idea of spiritual but not religious, which is one way that people have tried to deal with some of the challenges of that first aspect of learning religion for the sake of criticizing others, for the sake of winning in debates, for knowing something and being able to use it against someone else. They want to connect with the spiritual, but oftentimes that there's something that's lost in that. There's something that's not quite effective in that. So the idea of religious but not religious is a way of approaching this material by going towards the head of the snake, going towards that part that is most deadly, but you have to get there, otherwise, if you try to hold yourself too far back from it, you could get bitten. So this is the challenge of this material. You could also say spiritual but not spiritual. It all depends on which end of the snake you grasp. As we go through this this talk tonight, I've broken it down into 3 sections. We're going to talk, first of all, about what is the symbolic life. The second section, we're going to talk about why do we need a symbolic life? Why is this important? And then the third section is how to cultivate a symbolic life. I imagine we're not going to get through all of this material. I over-prepare, I have too much, I've left a lot out, and there's still too much. So as we get towards the end, I may just quickly move through some stuff. I may just end and turn it into a conversation. I'd really like it to be as much of a conversation as possible. So there's some stuff that we'll start with, and then we'll see where it kind of leads us. If we get away from the slideshow, the PowerPoint, that's fine. We'll be all right with that. I want to make a quick note about the images that I've used here. Instead of slide by slide finding the appropriate image, what I've done is in each section I've taken a theme and I've just kind of done variations on a theme. So you'll see in the first section that the symbol of the lion and the symbol of the individual engaging and wrestling with the lion plays out in many different ways. This is similar, I think, to the image of the person grabbing the snake. The second section, there's a number of images around the symbol of the tree. And then the third section, in terms of cultivating the symbolic life, the vessel, the boat, the ship that gets us through the wild storms. In 1939, Carl Jung gave a talk on the symbolic life to the Guild for Pastoral Psychology. And he stated that we are badly in need of a symbolic life. So before kind of examining why are we badly in need, I want to take just a little bit of time and talk about what we're talking about when we talk about the symbolic life. So the first aspect of the symbolic life is, here we go, the symbol. And this is what Jung says about our experience. He says, even when our senses react to real phenomena, sights and sounds, they are somehow translated from the realm of reality into that of mind. So the experience, the encounter with real objects has to be translated into the realm of mind. Within the mind, they become psychic events whose ultimate nature is unknowable, for the psyche cannot know its own psychical structure, substance. Thus, every experience contains an indefinite number of unknown factors. So reality is more than it appears. Every experience that we have has resonances beyond what we think we know about that experience. Every object that we encounter may have depths and dimensions beyond just the concrete presentation. It has an experience, it has that place where we meet it. So the experience of the object, the experience of the other, the experience of reality is not just reality, not just here, but it's somewhere in between. It's in our encounter. The symbol is the best expression of that unknown substance. It's the best expression for something that cannot be expressed in any other way. So the symbol is a kind of condensation of the experience of it in a very concise way of expressing a very complex set of facts. And Jung says this. He says, a symbol is a living gestalt or form, the sum total of a highly complex set of facts which our intellect cannot master conceptually and which therefore cannot be expressed in any other way than by the use of an image. Jung gives a number of examples of the kinds of things that can be symbolic. So when we're talking about a symbol, we're not just talking about a picture. We're not just talking about a visual image. He says there are symbolic thoughts and feelings, symbolic acts and situations. So the subjective experience, the feeling experience, the behavior can be symbolic, the acts and situations can be symbolic. And he says the most important symbols are not individual, but they're collective. They're collective in their nature and their origin, and they are found principally in the religion. So these are the symbols that humanity has kind of worked out over the course of its being here. So these are the collective symbols, and he wants to draw our attention past the personal experience to that collective experience, the collective dimension, and he calls them the représentation collective. He uses the French word, I think partly to give it that slightly other. You know, it gives it takes it out of just the mundane. I always puzzle about, Jung uses a lot of Latin and Greek, and he doesn't translate it, and he doesn't make it easy for us. It's partly because of that, because there's something in the language, there's something in that otherness of the language that directs your attention beyond just the word and something concrete to a feeling of that word. Jung wants to make sure that we distinguish between the idea of a symbol and a sign. Symbolic and semiotic meanings, he says, are very different things. Every view, he says, which interprets the symbolic as an analog or as an abbreviated designation for a known thing is semiotic. It's a sign. When you know what this means, it means that. It's a sign. The symbolic is the expression of something not yet known. And what he says is, the symbol is only alive as long as it's pregnant with meaning. And I think that's a really interesting image, that it's pregnant with meaning. So if you think of a woman who is pregnant, they're carrying a human being that is not yet known. You don't know who that is. You don't know what the personality of that individual is. You don't know who they will become. What you have are ideas, dreams, hopes, fantasies. You have an imagination that is starting to work out possibilities. Who will this be? So the symbol is that. The symbol has that quality of something that is alive, something that is personally connected with us in some way, but also something that is its own, that is separate, it's its own individual. And so it's got that the similar kind of energy, specialness that the unborn child might have. The next part of the idea of the symbolic life, Jung talks about, where do we live symbolically? Nowhere except where we participate in the ritual of life. Yes?
Could you maybe give an example of a sign versus a symbol? Something very basic in general.
Well, someone said stop sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, stop. Yes, so stop sign is, it has a meaning, it has a purpose, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't open you up to other possibilities, especially when you're in a car. That it has one meaning, it means stop. A stop sign in your dream might become a symbol. A stop sign that someone marks up with graffiti starts to change a little bit, but the stop sign in and of itself, it has a purpose. It says stop. There may be others. Yeah, there.
A sign that says 20 miles to New York. It's a sign, it's giving you direct information.
Yes.
You know what New York is.
Yes.
That's a sign, not a symbol.
Right, exactly. Direct information, there's nothing ambiguous about it, yes.
The apple on an Apple computer. You know what that is. This-
Right, the logo is, it's very much about that particular product. So the logo is definitely a sign, yeah. But all of these too can kind of break out, right, depending on where you encounter them.
Egyptian hieroglyph would be more a symbol. It has more meaning than just like a letter.
It has more meaning than a letter, right, right. It begins to have, it has, in the way that a Chinese character isn't just doesn't just have that one discrete meaning, yeah. Yes?
So that apple on the Apple computer, you could take it another way, really, right?
Sure. Sure.
It could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
In fact, it might be interesting actually to explore what it might, I never thought about it, but now if I think about it as a symbol, it actually is very provocative.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Right, there's a possibly a number of intentions with that. One is to brand it, right? That's one goal. So you see that symbol, you know exactly what it means. There's a product, it's branded. Then you can take a step back and go, well, why did they pick that? Why did, of all the possible symbols, did they stop and go, that's ours?
And it's got a bite out of it.
Right,
It's like Eve.
right.
Right? What is that?
Alan Turing.
Right. So you can these things, you know, there's often this fuzzy line sometimes between what's sign, what's symbol.
Yeah, and I would guess like with any given sign, a person brings to looking at that sign with various mimetic associations they have with whatever that thing is. And that when somebody is experiencing a symbol from, say, unconscious stuff coming through, they're going to take bits and pieces of various mimetics from their lives and into a thing that they're doing. That'll be more of a personal charged thing versus just these associations that are more conscious and
Right, and often a symbol will do that. As Jung says, it's a highly complex set of facts. So it will almost like a magnet draw these different associative elements to it, so that it's not just one thing, but you could go, oh, but maybe it's this. And that's often when you're working with a dream, you can look at it from so many different angles. You can start to kind of come at it in different ways and go, well, is that this, is that? And it begins to open up in different directions. Anita?
A plus sign, for example, is a sign, very different from a cross.
Yes, yes. Yeah, perfect, right. The plus sign has a very,
Definite.
yes.
You add something, yes.
So they would, I think in mathematics, they call it a symbol, don't they? The plus, I don't, the plus sign or the plus
you
symbol.
get notorious for making up jargon.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel is a unique contribution by Jung in a way is how to approach the imagery in dreams. I find with certain clients that their approach is very extroverted, very concrete, and they're treating the image as a sign.
Right.
And Jung says everything you dream is a part of yourself.
Right.
What is this telling you? And it immediately begins to have a symbolic implication.
Right.
And it's no longer a sign.
Right, right. It becomes the pointer, it becomes something that draws your attention not only to it, but beyond that image.
Exactly.
Yes. I'm going to go on a little bit, and then if there are other questions, I can. I'm not going to be anxious about this being a rich discussion, so we'll do a little bit more. But please, it's wonderful to engage in this. I was doing a workshop yesterday for a group of students at MIT, and it's a very different experience because they've all got their laptops and they just want to hear. And so getting the conversation going was a little bit of a challenge there. I want to I want to touch for a second on, because we're going to come back to it, Joseph Campbell's idea of the 4 functions of mythology. Because that connects in some way to this idea of the ritual and the importance of ritual. Joseph Campbell says there's 4 functions of mythology, we could say religion, 4 functions of a religion, of a mythology. The first is that of eliciting and supporting a sense of awe, an experience of the awe of the universe. When we had that comic strip and Oliver is freaking out about the expanding universe, that's that sense of this is blowing my mind kind of awe. The second function, he says, is to render an image of the universe, a cosmology, a way of seeing the universe, the cosmos in which we live, and our place in it. The story of this cosmos and the human being's role in it. The third, he says, is to support the social order. There's a social function of mythology and how we relate to each other. And then the fourth function of mythology is to initiate the individual into the orders of their own psyche, of his or her own psyche. So that initiatory element, so we have the awe, we have coming to terms with that and having some story of the cosmology, we have the interaction with others, and then we have the internal. And I think it's the ritual. Ritual touches on all of these different aspects, but on some level it's really that third or that fourth part of eliciting and initiating us into the experience of our own psyches, what it is to be this person at this moment. To have a relationship to the existential aspects, elements of our lives. And Joseph Campbell says, you should have a ritual for your life. In fact, I think I've got this here. You should have a ritual for your life. I don't like the way he says this here. He says, all ritual does is concentrate your mind on the implications of what you're doing. I'm not sure that's all it does, but it certainly does that. It concentrates your mind on the implications of what you're doing. Every ritual is of that order, properly putting your mind in touch with what you are really doing. So the ritual aspect of something is to bring you really present to what you're doing. So instead of just eating a meal, you maybe say grace before the meal, and that focuses your experience on the element of gratitude, of the fact that another being gave its life so that we can sustain our own, that kind of thing. My wife just went out for a birthday lunch with some friends of hers, and she found it very deflating because she said it was just lunch with presents. Nothing really happened. No one stopped and said, hey, it's your birthday. Let's focus on that. There was no moment of kind of ceremony or celebration. There was no ritual. Even that small ritual of raising a glass and a toast focuses your mind on what you're doing. It makes it somewhat special.
So it's
On-
cognitive reframing, so to speak.
It's a kind of cognitive reframing, it's a kind of acknowledgement of the unknown aspect, the existential aspect. That it's framing that moment and saying something is happening here. Let's just notice it. Let's pay attention to it. That's the ritual aspect. One of the things that Jung talks about, this, by the way, this is an image from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that's Lucy with Aslan, who is the Christ figure in the story. And there's a great passage where the children are having a meal with I think it's the beavers, and they say they're going to go meet Aslan, the lion. And one of the children says, "Oh, a lion? I think I'd be very afraid of that. Is he quite safe?" And the beaver says, "Safe? No, he's not at all safe, but he is good." That's that snake again, right? That's the dangerous element. He's not safe. This is not safe. It's part of the reason maybe that we stay away from the ritual, because it's not safe. One of the things that happens when we'll go back to that, you raise a glass and you make an acknowledgement of the person in front of you. It's your birthday. Dan, happy birthday. There's a moment where we connect. There's a moment where we are bonded. There's a moment where there's an intimacy and a vulnerability, and that's not safe. If I'm vulnerable, I'm not safe. And so we might want to just chatter or look at our phones and keep away from that. The ritual really connects us with not only ourselves, with the other, with the moment. Jung says this about the unconscious. He says, the unconscious no sooner touches us than we are it. We become unconscious of ourselves. That is the age-old danger, instinctively known and feared from time immemorial. He says that we come from this place where it's so easy to lose touch with our consciousness. It's so easy to go into that unconscious place. Fear, rage, anxiety, old resentments can come up. We can go into that place. The ritual, he says, was aimed at helping us stay up above as best as possible. That's the goal of the ritual. He said all man's strivings have been directed towards the consolidation of consciousness. So the ritual aspect is to consolidate, to keep ourselves conscious, to keep us from slipping back down. I was working with a woman this week who has been doing an enormous amount of work on an old trauma that she had, doing a lot of paying attention to her own needs. Someone who takes care of everybody. So she's been working really hard to pay attention to what she needs, to say no when it's appropriate to say no, to say I need time when it's appropriate to say I need time. And she gets tired of it. She gets exhausted because it's work, it's hard work. And when she gets really tired, she forgets altogether and she falls into this pattern where she's taking care of everybody and everything continues to be expended in the care of other people, and she loses the thread. She loses that consciousness that she's trying to gain around that. So the consolidation of consciousness is a difficult work, and we need these kind of rituals, we need practices. there's something in us that just wants to go onto automatic pilot, and the ritual keeps us focused. It helps us remember that we need to pay attention. You know, in the New Testament, where the line is about the importance of staying awake. You must stay awake because you don't know when the hour is. There's that moment, that work of staying awake is really hard. The temptation to fall asleep is there all the time. Yes.
And what,
Carol.
did I miss, what was the ritual that helped her in slipping back?
Well, she has several rituals. One of which is the analysis. One is her yoga practice. You know, she has a number of things that she's doing. One is for her to take time where she does a kind of meditation with her own emotions, and she does this really wonderful work of being able to kind of personify her emotions and be able to get some separation and distance. But it takes a kind of ritual intention to sit down every day, to find the time when that has to happen, to find the supports, where's the space that it happens, what time of day does it happen, what does she do right before, what does she do right after. It's not a formalized ritual for her, but there are ritual elements in the work. The ritual is the work of trying to stay conscious of that. Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was thinking, before I lose it, I'm taking in your idea of the work of the ritual. I feel like I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
So I'm taking it in. What would more quickly come to my mind around the word ritual was using ritual to go into the unconscious safely. In return.
Yes.
So it feels
Yes.
to me, anyway, I just wanted to say, I felt like that's what, one of the ways I think of ritual, and I'm like, I feel like I'm learning
Yes.
this.
I think that's,
work.
I think that's right. I mean, again, it's unconscious but not unconscious, right? To engage with the unconscious and to be able to relate to it without becoming it. Jung says, as soon as it touches you, you are it. So you don't want to be unconscious, but you do want to have a relationship and have that connection. So I think that you're absolutely right, that it is a way of, for her, it's a way of connecting to the emotions coming up and understanding them more and being able to understand the quality of them. Another woman that I know who had a breast cancer diagnosis about 10 years ago, and she had that happen on Labor Day. And end of August every year, she gets unbelievably sad and doesn't know why. And it takes a long time to remember, Labor Day is coming. This is the anniversary. And then she knows, she understands why she's feeling what she's feeling. And for a long time, she's been working to not feel what she's feeling, to not have those feelings. I want to have a good Labor Day. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy it. It keeps not happening. She keeps slipping back because something touched her of a profoundly existential moment, and she was changed, and she can't go back. And so part of what she has done over time is realize that instead of trying to get over that, she needs to, that has become for her a holy day. Not holy in the sense of wonderful and beautiful and a celebration. It's holy as in the terror and the beauty. I'm still alive, but I almost died. It's holy in the sense that it brought her into a profound encounter with life and death. And so now she tries to honor that with some kind of ritual awareness. So she stays conscious of it, but allows that unconscious experience, which takes her over, still takes her over. She doesn't create it. So it's there. She has to be present with it. So yeah, I think it's both. Yeah. In his talk on the symbolic life, one of the things that Jung talks about is that it's only the symbolic life. He says it's only the symbolic life that can express the need of the soul. The daily need of the soul, mind you, because people have no such thing. They can never step out of this mill, he calls it. This awful, grinding, banal life in which they are nothing but. In the ritual, they are near the Godhead. They are even divine. Everything in this world is banal, everything is nothing but. And that's the reason why people become neurotic. They're simply sick of the whole thing. Sick of that banal life, and therefore they want sensation. Well, we know that. We want sensation. We want excitement. We want trips to Las Vegas, and we want to, we want to be stimulated. That's really craving stimulation these days. He says they even want war. This is very timely. This is 1939. He's saying this. This is very timely. This very moment in our world. They even want war. They all want war. They're all glad when there's a war. They say, thank heavens, now there's something's going to happen. Now something important is going to happen. It says these things go very deep. Life is too rational. There's no symbolic existence in which I am something else. In which I am something else. In which I am fulfilling my role. My role is one of the actors in the divine drama of life. So beyond the job, beyond the daily work, there's a need to be something else, to have a sense of ourselves as more than just the everyday, more than just the errands that we have to do, more than just the cleaning of the toilet and the taking out of the garbage. That there is a need to feel that we are participating in something larger than ourselves. That's one of the things that I think is harder and harder and harder to connect to. It's what the religions connected us to at one point. In thinking of the symbolic life, religion has a particular meaning, and it has a particular meaning for Jung. It's not the institutional religion. For Jung, religion is this. Religion means the dependence on and submission to the irrational facts of existence. That's that, the irrational facts of existence, that's that dimension that can only be expressed in symbolic form, because we can't know what it is. That dimension is beyond what we can what we can contain as an object in our minds, in our thoughts, because we are in it. Yes?
So, I'm not sure if I agree with that statement.
Yeah?
Does Jung make a distinction between religion and dogma?
Yes, absolutely. He says there's a difference between religion and, he calls it creed. So the creed, he says, is the same as the established church. And religion, so this is, what he calls religion and creed, we would call spirituality and religion. That's generally the language that we use. So his religion is more that kind of spiritual relationship with that transcendent dimension, not the dogma. Those are different things. Yes?
All your symbols have a lion in them.
Yes.
You want to discuss the symbology of the lion, or we're going to do that later?
Well, yeah. We can. Do you have a thought about it?
I have no thought on it.
Yeah.
What's your thought on it?
Well, if you notice, a lot of the images have human beings in connection with the lion, and there is this. I wonder if I have it here. There's a great quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Let's see if I've got it. This is in an earlier version, so I'm going through the old version here for a second. Oh, I don't have it here. I don't have it. But basically, the verse goes something like, a human being eaten by a lion is cursed as, what is it? Oh, there's something, he talks about when the human being is eaten by the lion, then that human being becomes a lion or becomes lionish. But a lion that's eaten by a human being is blessed because it becomes human. So there's the relationship with this fierce dimension. There's something there. I don't about the dangerousness of it, the fierceness of it, of being connected to something that it could easily overpower us. I mean, that's part of what drew me to those images. Does anybody else have a thought? I mean, as you're watching these images, yeah.
Well, you're talking about the lion Aslan, and it's actually Turkish for lion. But then I wanted to get to the reference of what C.S. Lewis would be talking about. I think the lion comes from the Lion of Judah, and the Savior comes from the nation of Judah.
Right.
And also when you talk about being dangerous and safe, it's like the Almighty is dangerous if you get on his bad side.
Right.
Through sin, but then he's safe if you are made right with him.
Right.
He wants to save you.
Yeah. 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 Great. Yes.
Which kind of reminds me that the word religion, I believe, religio means to reunite. It's like the idea of remember.
Right.
To bring the members back together, or to reconstitute the authentic original.
Yes. Yeah. To reconnect. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Looking at this particular image, I'm reminding of the Zen ox herding pictures. With
Yes.
the man riding the ox.
Yeah.
Riding it.
Right.
Something instinctive or animalistic.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. I like that. It's a similar kind of image. Right. Right. And in that series, it's about becoming one in a sense with that ox, and then they disappear. And I mean, it's a really wonderful series of how you relate and following the ox home, and the relationship, and getting to the point where you're riding it, where you're one. You're riding it. The idea, this image comes up a lot. If you think about, say, riding the ox or riding the elephant, that's often an image. You do not control that being. You have some way of communicating, but that being is the power, and it will, if you think that you are in charge of that power, you're in trouble. But if you have a right relationship, you can ride it. So that there are elements of all of those. That's great. Oh, there's one over here.
Just say where I'm going with it is, you talk about the mill of existence and how grinded down we get.
Yes.
And that we don't have a symbolic life, so we're separated from our souls. So we're diminished. We actually have a smaller self-image of ourselves than we really are. And that this idea of the line or these forces are actually things that could be symbolically within us. But since we don't think or radiate out all of that potential, we don't feel connected to them, and then they run rampant and uncontrolled in the world. So the cruelty that we see in the world, I think, is that untamed lion, that if we lived a symbolic life, and that's what we need to go towards as a way of reordering, and all things want to find that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. It reminds me of, I read just a quote recently from Marie-Louise von Franz, where she talks about how those creative possibilities within us, when they are not lived, turn destructive. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you're talking about. That's great. Thank you. All right. Let's see, what else? So we've just started talking about religion. Okay. This is, there's an alchemical picture of this queen riding on the lion, and there's a pelican in there in the orb. So there's another image of the riding of the lion. This is Carl Jaspers. He talks about reflection on God and faith, and he talks about it in terms. The word he uses is not religion. The word he uses is philosophy. But in a sense, he's referring to the same dimension. And what he says is, man is fundamentally more than he can know about himself. So that's that same thing that Jung was talking about, where our experience has all of these unknown, an infinite number of unknown aspects to it. Human beings are fundamentally more than we can know about ourselves. And he says, to believe in God means to live by something which is not in the world, except in the polyvalent language of phenomena, which we call the hieroglyphs or symbols of transcendence. So the phenomena of the world are the symbols of transcendence. And he says, faith is no possession. It confers no secure knowledge, but it gives certainty in the practice of life. So this is the snake again. This is, if you are trying to learn the Dharma in order to criticize others or win at debates, you're looking for some kind of possession. You have something, you have knowledge, you know something. He's saying it confers no secure knowledge, but it gives certainty in the practice of life. So it's not about knowing, but it's about having a relationship to that transcendent aspect of life, which we can't know about, but which, when we have that relationship, can confer a kind of security in your experience, a trust in life. Edinger talks about it as the psychological attitude that is able to affirm life. Philosophy, says Jaspers, does not give. It can only awaken. It can remind and help to secure and preserve. In it, each of us understands what he actually knew before. Now this is similar to what you were saying back there about what's inside of us. The symbolic life is not about having a knowledge of possession. It's about engaging something, engaging in that dimension which awakens in us what we already have but we are not awake to. So it's not about knowing something, it's about having a relationship with life that makes us feel like things are pregnant with meaning. I'm going to skip through here a little bit. This is Katy Perry at the Super Bowl. Here's the same image of the woman riding the lion. Now, did she know these images when she set up this choreography? I think this is stunning. She may have, I have no idea. But here's how this same image is being expressed in the contemporary world. Katy Perry singing Roar at the Super Bowl, riding on the back of a giant lion. It's the same symbol. It's extraordinary. Jung says, if we understand these things for what they are, as symbols, if we have that sense that Jaspers is talking about, if we understand them as symbols, then we can only marvel at the unfathomable wisdom that is in them and be grateful to the institution which has not only conserved them but developed them dogmatically. So here he's affirming that the institution, the creed, has value and purpose, in that this is the world where these symbols are contained, they're held, they're worked on. The religious institutions, theology, theologians keep the symbols, they keep revisiting the symbols, so they attempt to keep what's alive in them alive and bring out new dimensions. There's a lot in the church that I'm connected to, there's a lot of wrestling with how is this even relevant in our world. There's all of this very old patriarchal language. Let's try and shift it, and let's try to bring in gender neutral language. We're trying a lot of things to try to make this experience authentic and alive and relevant. Some of that will stick, and some of it won't. But it's all the experiment that has to continue to be made, because the things that stick will be the things that in general feel like, yes, that's got a truth to it. That feels like it's alive. There's something there. Yeah.
There's an idea in Jewish mysticism, in Kabbalah, that looks at this idea in terms of a nut, that the dogma of a religion, or the outer form of the religion, is like the shell of a nut that protects the living seed within.
Yeah.
And that when you approach that, you're not supposed to eat the shell.
Yes.
You're supposed to crack it open, get inside, and get the
Right.
what's significant.
Yes. That's great. I love that image.
So that the dogmas of the world religions carry those symbols down through the centuries for us.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily intended to be nourished by that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's wonderful. I love that image. That's such a great one, because it protects it. It nurtures it. It keeps it safe, but it's too easy to confuse the shell for the thing.
You gotta break it.
And you have to break it open. Yes, you have to break it open. Right. That's certainly the that's the path that Jesus walks, where he says it points beyond him. It's always beyond. Don't hold on to me I must go away. I mean, you have to break it.
It's the finger that points at the moon. You're not going to get stuck on the finger, are you?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's great. I love that's a wonderful.
If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him.
You see the Buddha on the road, kill him. Yeah, the vessel that gets you to the other shore. When you get to the other shore, you don't pick up the vessel and carry it with you. You don't carry the boat on your back. Yeah, that's exactly it.
But the boat's required to give you enough structure to make it there.
It has to have enough structure so that you don't drown. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Okay, how are we doing? Doing quite well, actually. I want to go back to this quote. I just sort of referred to it at the beginning, where Jung talks about we're badly in need of the symbolic life. Why do we need a symbolic life? He says, we are in need of a symbolic life, badly in need. We only live banal, ordinary, rational, or irrational things, but we have no symbolic life. He says, have you got a corner somewhere in your house where you perform the ritual? As you can see in India, he says, even in the simple houses there, they have at least a curtain corner where members of the household can perform the symbolic life, where they can make their new vows or their meditation. But we don't have that. We have no such corner. We have our own room, of course, but there's a telephone which can ring us up at any time, and we always must be ready. So can you imagine how awful that is, that somewhere in your house there's a room that has a telephone, and that phone might ring somewhere in that house, and it might get you? Well, what do you think about the fact that every single one of us now walks around like this? We can be reached at any time. We're constantly online. We're constantly connected. There is no space, the space where we can step outside to get to that time where there is no time, where you forget everything. You forget what Joseph Campbell says, you forget what you owe people, you forget what you have to do, and you just have a kind of sacred, separate space. We don't have that. We don't, a lot of times when I'm working with people, we realize that in their experience growing up, their private space was never allowed to exist. They couldn't be quiet in their own room. And so there was no place where they could go away and not be part of the family, but be connected to whatever they were connected to. It always had to be shared. And now we share everything. It's very stressful. It's very stressful sharing everything all the time. So this is Jung's quote around religion and creed. He says, to be the adherent of a creed is not always a religious matter. If you're part of a dogma, it's not always religious. But more often it's a social one, and as such it does nothing to give the individual a foundation. So this is when you confuse the shell for the thing. It's not the religious dimension that you're connecting with. You're connecting with the social realm of things. This is from a Pew study on the decline of religious affiliation in the United States. So what it shows, this is taken in 2014, and it compares with the results from about 7 years previously, 2007. It says that among the religiously affiliated, about 97%, if you have a religious affiliation, 97% believe in God. And 66% pray daily. But the percentage of people who describe themselves as religiously affiliated has shrunk from 83% to 70%. So the people who say they're part of a creed, a part of a particular religion, has shrunk. And the number of adults who are religiously unaffiliated has grown, 16% to 23%.
Do you happen to know if this is adhering to a specific religion or not religious at all as an atheist?
Well, so this
Okay,
is
conflating the two.
this is the next section. The people who describe themselves as nuns. This is more about we have no religious affiliation. It's not necessarily atheism.
Gotcha.
I just heard your question the right way. But there are the people who describe themselves as nuns. They have no religious affiliation. Not those nuns. The other kind of nuns. Nuns with a O. The nuns, by the way, these nuns, now I can't say it without picturing someone in a habit. These are mostly people of the millennial generation. This is the younger generation who describe themselves as having no affiliation, and their belief in God has dropped. So there's a net sort of decrease in the people in the United States who describe themselves as religious. But in a separate Pew study, Americans are describing themselves as more spiritual. About 6 in 10 adults now say they regularly feel a deep sense of spiritual peace. 46% of Americans say they experience deep sense of wonder about the universe at least once a week. So, we have spiritual peace and well-being, but not belief. Those two have become separate. The spiritual need is still there. Remember, we had the 4 functions of mythology. One was about awe. That need for something that makes us go, wow, is still there. But the experience of finding that within the religion or the mythology is decreasing. So what's going on? What's happening? Well, one of the things that's happening is that we live in a much more diverse world than we ever have. And that diversity is actually seems to be lowering the participation in religious ritual. So people who come from religiously diverse versus religiously similar social networks. So in your network, in your neighborhood, if you know people who are of separate religions, the more sort of pluralistic your network of people is, the less likely you are to participate in religious services. 37% of people from religiously diverse groups versus 68% from religiously similar attend services. So that diversity drives down. Same with mixed religion families. So if there's an interfaith family, 2 people have come from different backgrounds, the same dynamic. You're less likely to attend services. So all of this is shifting. Our world is shifting, and that's challenging this old order. What I would say is what we're seeing is the social function of mythology is not holding right now. The social function that holds us all together in the same story is not functioning in each separate religion. We live, and this actually relates, so this is one of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about the topic for the intensive, about meeting the other. We live in a world where we have to come to terms with the other. We have to live in a pluralistic world. there has to be some opening to other. And so our sense of how we relate to the divine, to the transcendent, has to reflect that. There are a number of theologians who are actually addressing that. There's a man, Raymond Panikar, who is a mystic and a Catholic theologian with a Hindu background, so he's pluralistic in his very being. Talks about God, and he says God is a symbol it's just one symbol that we can use to describe this experience. So even that sense of what God is opening up, because it can't be exclusive. It can be, but it doesn't hold. This kind of thing starts to happen. Yes?
Yeah, I was just reading something about the newer phenomenon among millennials of forming, those who are non-religious affiliated, I suppose, still drawn to that need for the social congregation. In doing so in really unconventional ways. A lot of them are workplace related. They even related it to like microbrewery hangouts and things of that nature.
Or
But-
fandoms, or like a fandoms or that sort of thing.
those
We
are
all go to
the-
watch the same sci-fi movies.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there is a need for finding places of shared community and connection. Yeah. Yeah. So those functions that mythology holds, awe, social function, cosmology, connecting you to, those are important functions. And it's interesting. So people are seeking ways of meeting those needs. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Erica.
in that term, I think of people who like get together and do Dungeons and Dragons or some of those fantasy, imaginal places.
Yes. Yeah.
Millennial,
Yeah, a lot of my nephews in that millennial generation, and they're really seeking real, concrete, embodied engagement with other people. They do. He does these sort of they're games, and it takes you out into the world, and you meet people, and they get away from that virtual world, which they're natives, that's where they grew up, and they're longing for something tangible and physical. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I wonder,
Yeah.
just as about like the evolution of the functionality and need of religion according to what's going on in your culture at the time. In societies that are pre-modern, I'm guessing there's a fair bit of material suffering because that's the nature of the hard work of living and people you love dying all the time around you. So they want to escape the mundanity and have the transcendent, where people who live cushy modern lives might be looking to return back to the immanent.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's interesting. That's an interesting. The question is, where has God gone? Where is God? Where are we missing? What's the missing piece? What do we need? That's an interesting idea. Yes.
I wonder if you could say something about Jung's concept of the numinous, how this fits in the picture. It seems to me a numinous experience is not necessarily the experience of God or
Yes.
an impression of symbolism, but
Yes.
something of another order
Yes.
of experience.
Yeah, thank you. We're right on the verge of getting to exactly that, and you've put your finger on exactly the problem that this presents. So that we're coming there. Yes.
So Joseph Campbell keeps saying that the problem that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have, both all coming out of that same area, is that we have insisted that our religions are based on historical fact. And that has left us then with the mystical function of the first function of his four functions has been empty. because of its historical fact, then it's part of the world of space and time, and you can't, I mean, it loses its transcendence. So we've kind of done this to ourselves.
Well, I think that's really interesting, and I think that's part of where that bitter battle between science and religion comes in, because both science and religion are treating the mythology and the symbols of religion as another form of science,
Yeah.
as a form of saying this thing happened, instead of being related to its own dimension. So I think that's really an interesting piece.
And part of the reason probably that this whole switch away from religious behavior is because with science becoming, basically we no longer need science to give us these cosmological cues about the way the world works. Now we don't need religion to tell us how because we have science. And so that it seems like this that no one needs anymore, but the other three functions are still there.
And that's exactly it. Science does a great job of the awe function. It really does. You see some of those shots from the Hubble telescope and those kinds of things, and we'll see Oliver from Bloom County display that in a moment. But you're exactly right. What about the other functions? This is Abraham Joshua Heschel's a quote. That's not Abraham Joshua Heschel. That's the tarot card of the hanging man on the tree. But this is what Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's a rabbi, and a Jewish theologian, and a mystic, and just it's wonderful. If you ever catch a video of it, it's wonderful to watch. He's just so alive with this material. He was a civil rights activist with Martin Luther King. Really interesting writings. He says, it's customary to blame secular science and anti-religious philosophy for the eclipse of religion in modern society. It would be more honest to blame religion for its own defeats. Religion declined not because it was refuted, but because it became irrelevant, dull, oppressive, insipid. This is a theologian. This is a man of God talking. When faith is completely replaced by creed, worship by discipline, love by habit, when the crisis of today is ignored because of the splendor of the past, when faith becomes an heirloom rather than a living fountain, when religion speaks only in the name of authority rather than with the voice of compassion, its message becomes meaningless. This, you could just put this up and then walk away. That's a mic drop right there. Abraham Joshua Heschel. Yeah.
Jason, I perceive our present condition, and I think this describes it in some ways, as a transition from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. And those who have written about that contrast, in the Piscean age you have the ascending fish and the descending fish. Fish swim in schools. It is a collective, communal, shared experience of the transcendent and of the numinous that becomes creedal as well, but there is meaning in the creed and particularly in the rituals.
Yeah.
And in the Aquarian age, we're left with the water carrier, where each individual has to carry on their own shoulder their own unconscious, as Jung points. Jung looked to Martin Luther, for example, as one of the early Aquarians, because he had an individual encounter with the divine and with grace, and had to confront the papacy and all of the discipline, because he was himself a monk.
Right.
And to me, that is part of our dilemma. and we haven't begun to learn how to cope with it.
Yes.
We use cell phones now rather than meditation or self-reflection.
Right.
We don't have to. And we have as a president somebody who has, I can't remember how many million, waiting for his next Twitter.
Right.
So that's part of our terrible dilemma at this early stage
Yeah.
in the Aquarian age.
Yeah.
Now, there's another thing I would like to add, which is we have been talking about spirituality and the mystical and the mythological. There is nothing more numinous, more intense, more overwhelming than what I went through and what millions of military and all different armies and navies, when you wake up in the morning and you know you may not be alive at night,
Yes.
and if you are alive, you get drunk and you tell the wildest kinds of jokes. That is archetypal, numinous.
Absolutely.
That is, you are fully alive
Yes.
because you may die.
Right.
And Jim Hillman writes this book, The Terrible Love of War. And that's part of what war provides when we find ourselves lost in triviality.
Yes.
And so part of what we're experiencing in our country right now and in the world is the emergence of the collective shadow.
Yes.
Because we've lost touch with any common sense of the awe, the numinosity, and the transcendence
Yeah.
of values and meaning. Anita and I gave a 3-session presentation in our church, and our title for the 3 was God is an Experience. The first session was God is Presence. The second section was God is Power. The third section was God is Healing.
Mm.
They're all an active verb.
Yeah.
They're not a creed.
They're not, and you remind me of the book, and I can't remember the author, but the title of the book was God is a Trauma.
Yeah.
And it's that encounter with the extremities of existence and life. I think yes, thank you, that's exactly.
And you know, I haven't ever thought this through, it's really come up thanks to you this evening, but I wonder how many people suffering from PTSD cannot come out of something that was so overwhelmingly mythic and transcendent, come back to an everyday human life.
Right. How do you make that transition back? It's a profound, and we don't do it. We don't help. We don't have a ritual, and we don't say. We just say, get to work. You're home. Let's get you a job.
In traditional societies, you do have like a very strong ritual thing. If you go into war, you have to go through the temple in order to be purified and reintegrated, or else
Absolutely.
happen.
Yeah.
To that point, colleagues of mine who have studied different EMDR, very dedicated people, by the way, and there's a lot of help with that. I'm not saying anything negative about that. What I want to say is when the tsunami hit, they went there hoping to help.
Mm.
And what they found out is that the people themselves had this collective ritual, and they drummed and danced and wailed.
Yeah.
And they did this for more than a week.
Yeah.
And when that's how they did it. And my friend said she felt just so I don't know if the word was insignificant, but
Yeah.
something in relation to that
Yeah.
group ritual feeling.
So you have, there's the function of awe. There's the function of that fits in some picture of the universe, a cosmology. You have the social function. You have the psychological function. It's all there. I mean, it's all held. It's amazing. It's a wonderful thing. We live digital lives where we separate things and everything is discrete and everything is its own unit, and so we deal with the mind over here, and we do not have that more analog view where everything kind of blends and everything's connected and everything's interconnected. So I think that's a wonderful example. Wonderful example. Let's check in at this point. We're getting close. I want to come back to Opus and Oliver for a second. Opus says, I'm a simple penguin. What's dark matter? A logic-based theory cleansed of the primordial mud of religious superstition. We can't see it, touch it, smell, feel, or sense it, but for us secular rationalists, it explains the universe. It's there, it's here, everywhere, it has to be, and it's no doubt glorious. There's the function of awe. Well, how could it not be? Cleansed of all that woo-woo mud. I've got atheist chills, says oh. And this gets, you were talking, science does provide that awe.
And it provides cosmological framework.
And it provides that framework. But it also, it's also an expression of this archetypal need to encounter the universe that we live in. Just briefly, there's a kind of discussion that was held with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Do you know him? So he hosted this event where a number of people got together to discuss the possibility, and some thought the probability, that this reality that we're living is a simulation, a computer simulation. That somewhere in the distant future, with all of our advances, someone will have created this computer simulation. It's a creator myth. I mean, it's another version of a creator myth. We might be a simulation, I don't know. But it's interesting how that kind of thing breaks through, continues to break through. So one of the challenges is this: the loss of symbols. What happens when those religious containers aren't functioning? And this is what Jung says. He says, this is what people don't know, that they are exposed. He says that before this, he's talking about how the symbol and the dogma are there, they are there to apply, as a formula to apply when the soul is in peril. I had a client who had a really painful, re-traumatizing experience, and was triggered and having flashbacks and this awful experience, and didn't know how she was going to make it through the night, couldn't sleep. And in the middle of this struggle for her, the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel came to her. From her religious education, which was also traumatizing And she didn't want that story, but there it was. And she hated that it was there, but it was what she had. And she knew that if she wrestled with this, if she stayed with it and she wrestled with this, she would gain something. Just like Jacob wrestling with the angel. At the end, he's wounded and he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And that's what she said in her own way. When the soul is in peril, these symbols come to our aid and they guide us through. And this is why Jung says, when we don't have them, what we don't know, what people don't know, what the nuns don't know, not those nuns, but these nuns, is that they are exposed. They're naked to the unconscious when they can no longer use the old ways, particularly since nowadays they don't even understand what they mean. So we don't have a relationship to it. It's just a weird image and we're exposed. Jung's own experience of this is an image from the Red Book, where he was wrestling with this, his soul was in peril, and he said, to the extent that I managed to translate the emotions into images, to find images which were concealed in the emotions, I was calmed and reassured. Had I left those images hidden in the emotions, I would have been torn to pieces by them. Had I left the images in the emotions, had I not connected, had I not found the symbol, had I not found some container, the lion would have torn him to shreds. The snake would have bitten him and killed him. He would have been torn to pieces. And this gets to that piece that you were talking about. This is the numinous. This is the numinous that Thayer was talking about, the numinosity that comes in that confrontation with mortality, that facing of mortality. That is numinous. And we, often when we're from a Jungian perspective, we talk about numinosity, and it's beautiful and it's lovely, but it's also terrible and terrifying. If you're confronting your own death, you're a soldier in war, if you have been given a diagnosis, a cancer diagnosis, some other, if you are, it's not beautiful, but it is numinous, it's powerful. Jung uses this very religious language. He says, in an excess of affect, in an emotionally excessive situation, I come up against a paradoxical fact or happening. I am, in the last resort, encountering an aspect of God, which I cannot judge logically and cannot conquer because it's stronger than me. That's the experience. That's the numinous experience. It is bigger than us. We think we're very clever and we can figure things out and we can contain it. But God is a symbol for that which is bigger than us and will always be bigger than us and is beyond what we can imagine. And if you've confronted the loss of someone, if you've been confronted with your own mortality, the mind cannot process it. You can't think it through. It doesn't make sense. And people suffer because they try to make sense of these things. It doesn't make sense. But you can live it. You can find a way to. But if you don't have a symbol, you don't know how to. It's almost impossible. It overwhelms. It tears you apart. The symbols, the religions in their nutshell. The symbol can be that nutshell that holds and contains you. Yes?
Can you speak at all to the function of the symbolic life in dreams and how that relates to the symbolism in religion? Can our dream life give us some of restore some of these functions?
Yes, and we probably aren't going to get to it, but that is Jung's position, is that, and this gets back to the water carrier, is that we are, each of us in some way, we each have to be our own theologian. We each have to be our own priest or minister, and we have to engage. You know, Jung, in one of his letters, he gives the advice. You know, he made his red book over many, many years, and he would often give that advice to people who would say, write down your dreams, draw your dreams, create a beautiful book, take care of them, work on them, work with them. Then you have your images, you have your symbols. In a sense, what he's saying is, you have your myth, you have your story. And it's the engagement through the dreams that gets you there. It's engagement through your encounter with the symbols that come up in dreams, active imagination, that sort of thing. There's a lot. There was some over here.
Would you share that picture behind you, please?
Yeah, I have notes on all the pictures, but I don't actually. I can't get it to come up on the screen here, but this picture is an image of, this is the tree of life. This is Jesus on the cross, but Jesus as the tree of life. So out of the, it's almost Jesus as the lifeblood, the sap of the tree of life, the seed that dies in the ground and the life that comes out of it. It's that image. Yeah, Dan.
I just wanted to piggyback on what you were saying about dreams and the numinosity and symbolism of dreams. I'm reminded of a Joseph Campbell quote, and it may be a Jungian quote too, but he says that myths are public dreams, dreams are private myths, and I would take the next step and say maybe dreams are our way of kind of connecting to spirituality.
Jung says that. He says that every dream is a spiritual experience. There's one place where he does say that. Is there someone over there? There's someone at the back, yes.
So I agree with what Theo was trying to say, but I think everybody in this room feels that society is going in one direction. Technology, rationality, which drives me crazy. And how do you react? Like you say, you follow your individual inner self. All of society is going in one direction, and you feel like you're, a salmon trying to go up Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
And I think, when I hear all these questions, I think people are feeling the same thing, but don't know what to do about it in society as a whole.
Well, I think that's right. That's one of the great challenges. The loneliness that comes, the separateness, the I'm on my own path, I'm wandering in the woods on my own, I'm going against the current. That's part of the struggle, right? That's part of a lot of my patients struggle with just that. If I do this, if I say yes to this thing that we're talking about here, that means I'm different from my family. I've left them. That means my friends won't understand me. That means I might wander in the wilderness for 40 years and I have no idea if I'll get to the promised land. It's that crucial. It's that crucial of an experience. Very, very hard. The pain, there's a neuroscience researcher who talks about the pain of independence. The pain that being different, even having a slightly different perception of things, is felt, we have this very visceral need to belong. We're protected in the group. So when we're outside of it, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
And I would think that traditional religious structures, and particularly mystical initiatory structures, are a container for people going through these experiences and a way of creating community. It's not you're going away from your tribe, you're actually coming deeper in these circumstances.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly right. There's all of these things that people are talking about. I mean, we could go through, and there are bits and pieces that are related to all of this. Let me kind of scan through some of the material, because everybody's bringing up things that I think are really crucial. I want to get to the last part a little bit about the cultivation of the symbolic life. I love this image of the Buddha in the roots of the tree. So one of the things that we find, one of the studies that have been done in the American Journal of Psychiatry is that we don't have to spend too much time on it. People who are religiously affiliated are less likely to commit suicide. The unaffiliated are more likely to make more attempts over their lifetime, and they're more likely to have a family member who has attempted suicide. So we'll just get through that. In connection with that, there's another study that shows that the protective factors against suicide are, not surprisingly, reasons for living. When you have reasons for living, close family, when you don't, you have higher scores in terms of, you feel less hopelessness, fewer moral objections, you have more responsibility to the family, you have greater fear of social disapproval, more concern about others, children. Reasons for living is a protective factor, and given what we just saw, having a religious affiliation. So this is actually empirical kind of support for Jung's idea that without the symbols, we are in grave danger. We are exposed. And this comes to the idea of meaning. Jung says meaninglessness inhibits fullness of life and is therefore equivalent to illness. We need meaning. All religions are therapies for the soul. I'm going to pass through this a little bit. Another quote from Heschel, and get to, we talked a little bit about dreams. One of the things that Jung says, Jung's answer to how to deal with this loss of symbols, one is, he says, if you can get it back into a religion and it will work for you, go there. He often would send his patients there. But, he says, if the ritual and dogma fully express the psychological situation of that person, they can be cured. If not, they can't be cured. And then it's into analysis. He says, then you're in for it. You're in the ride. And we're going through hell together. Dreams are one of the ways. He has a lot of quotes where he says, every dream is a spiritual experience. We've forgotten the fact that God speaks chiefly through dreams and visions. It connects us to that transcendent element of our own being, the transcendent dimension of experience. Active imagination is the process of dreaming with eyes wide open. One of the things that I just wanted to touch on before we finished is, what is it that is in religion that we're missing? Why does the spiritual but not religious not quite function? Well, because there are certain elements of that nutshell, that we're missing. A religion provides a structure. You go to church every Sunday, you attend temple, there's a structure to it. There's a technique, prayer, meditation, different forms of worship. There are symbols. And there's a sacred space. There's often, there's the sanctuary of some kind. These are elements that require a certain amount of structure and discipline, and we lose that without that. And analysis is one form, it's one structure, right? There's a structure to it, there's a technique to analysis. There are symbols that come up, they come up from the dreams. Those are the symbols we work with. And there's a sacred space. That space and that container. But do you have to go to analysis? Well, no, there are probably other ways. Art, different ways
Music.
of connecting. Music, absolutely. Dance, yes, yes.
There's scriptures behind where the swords.
And scripture, there's reading of scripture. There is the structure of that, and having the scripture that speaks to you and going to it and engaging with it. It has the great benefit of having the container of those symbols available to you to use them and be helped with them. It can probably be a little bit much to hope that it all comes up from you, but you can also have your engagement with the collective symbols of the culture, how you relate to it. My own experience was, because I grew up in a very secular household, was I had to understand what I was rejecting. I had to figure out what it was that I was saying no to. I just said no because that's just what you did. And one of the things that Karen Armstrong says is that, and this goes back to your comment too about the nutshell, she said, we think scientifically where you have to kind of prove that the object of religion is true, and then you can go to that, and then you can do that thing. She says, that's backwards. That's not how it has been done. Religion was a practice. It was something you had a knack for. And engaging in the practices, and engaging in the rituals, and engaging in the scriptures gave you the experience, helped you find and reach the experience. Jung says the same thing about dreams. He says, I have to go with the theory that dreams are meaningful, otherwise I couldn't even possibly take this on at all. I just have to make the experiment. And when I engage with dreams, when you engage with the scripture, then something can happen. And then you have the experience that is your own. And the vessel then can be left behind, but the vessel gets you to that. There's more, but I think at the heart, all of the comments have been so rich. So I'd rather kind of finish with that. If there are any other questions or comments.
I have a whole different image of the Aquarian image. First
Yeah.
of all, she was a woman originally.
Yes.
Before the patriarchal age came along and thought it should be a man.
Yeah.
And maybe the ceramic pot is not. It's a vessel that's open at the top and open at the bottom, so the water flows through. And that's a wonderful image of the Aquarian age and the sense of the symbolic process, because you don't have to carry that heavy pot around with you. The water can flow through
Right.
and make a difference in your life.
Right. The vessel in some way is connected to the flow of the water.
Yes,
And it's the
it
flow
is.
of the water that matters, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's lovely. I
Yes.
love it, beautiful. Yes.
You know, you had a quote from Viktor Frankl up there, and I'm a great admirer of
Yes.
his. You know, his man's search for meaning, how he survived in Auschwitz concentration camp, where you're stripped of meaning, and it was death now or death tomorrow, pretty
Right.
much. But he said, you know, and I know you're familiar with it, that how do you take trauma to make meaning and find hope? And he talked about the people. There's a beautiful part of that book. It was near the end of the war. They had been working on road construction and everyone was exhausted, the slave laborers. And there was bombing and the lights went out in the shanty that they're in. And somebody shouted out, "Frankel, you're a shrink. Tell us what to do." And he said, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but that's how it struck me, and it was so powerful. Because he knew that when those events happened, when the lights went back on, people had hung themselves, and they would kill themselves. And he said one of the most beautiful things that meant so much in my life. He said, imagine a person who deeply loves you, and what he or she would say to plead for your life. Think and concentrate on that. And he said when the lights went back on, there wasn't one death by suicide. And they came up and they touched him, as he said, like a prophet. But he reached in deeply to make meaning out of trauma and to give hope.
And to evoke that feeling
That's
of
a
like
wonderful
social accountability.
story.
Yeah, well, the people, you know, just to the deep appreciation that in your, and that's what I think the symbols of religion try to give to you,
Yes,
is that transition.
yes.
And that meaning making when you're really threatened in the fear and trembling.
I thank you for that. I mean, that's a beautiful example, and the idea of the love that comes through and what that means, and love can't be described, but it makes me think of the original meaning of the word belief, which didn't mean to believe something as true. It meant to love. And so the belief it wasn't that you had something as a possession. It was something you gave your heart to. It was something that you loved, and that's the dynamic, that's the flow. It can't just be held in the vessel, it's got to flow through and connect you with the flow of life. So reminding people that they weren't isolated, but there was someone who loved them and would plead for them, that connects them, yes.
At the end, towards the end of the end of the Red Book, Jung talks about love. He has a whole little thing about love.
Yeah, it strikes me that when it boils right down to it, that's it somehow. So, yeah.
Could you explain that picture over there, please?
That is an image of, again, I don't have my notes in front of me, Pyrrha and Deucalion in the flood. And there's an echo of the flood with the ark. And all this section is about having the vessel to carry you over the waters. So it's interesting to think about the vessel, not that carries you over the waters, but that the waters flow through you. It's an interesting image. Let's finish with this from Jung. Let's go all the way to the end. The decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? That is the telling question of his life. If only we know that the thing which truly matters is the infinite, only if we know can we avoid fixing our interests upon futilities and upon all kinds of goals which are not of real importance. What connects us to that dimension and gives that escape from the grinding mill, so that we're focused on what matters? Love. What matters at the end? What matters when you're about to give it all away? I think it comes into love. Yes.
Along with that, I find that in love, one is known and knows another, and it's that insight into self and other, and that connectability is the
Absolutely. Where do I end and you begin, and that connection of knowing another and being known, and of finding oneself in the other, and finding the other in yourself, and that essential loneliness that we were talking about, of being separate, that's where we get relief from that. We get escape from that, our separateness, where we're part of each other, part of the universe, part of the culture.
Except that what I think has been de-emphasized in the potential religious life in this culture for a number of years now is that it is not necessarily, this all really erupted, I think, in the 60s, and approaches to various kinds of psychotherapeutic approaches in the 60s and 70s. but it's not necessarily love for another human, it's not necessarily intimate, it's not a couple, it's not marriage, it's love for God, it's love for that which cannot be seen. And because we are so focused with having our desires met by each other, or by never being alone, by getting on your iPhone or turning your computer on and
Right.
just young kids are doing what they're doing with their computers on with another person there.
Right.
Always being in the presence of another person. That's not really what you've been speaking of this
Right.
evening. What you're speaking of, and what Jung was speaking about, I'm certain, has to do with a love that is transcends us loving each other, getting married to each other. I mean, he was quite unconventional about that. Or even love for your child or love for your parent. It's the love, what we've collectively developed amnesia about, is that this love is not attached to a particular desire or
Right.
closeness or sexual union with another human being.
Right. It's not a love that holds or possesses, but maybe that sees through, and it gets to that dimension. I think you're right. There's I can't remember who it was, a woman, a mystic in her 30s or 40s, writing to the Archbishop of Canterbury and saying, you're focusing on ethics and being good to each other, and that's important. She said, but what's interesting about religion is God. And we've forgotten God, we've forgotten the transcendent. And so I think that's something like what you're speaking to, that love that opens and continues to open.
Well, like Jungian of Norwich, who is known as the first woman who actually wrote, and watching the plagues devastate so many young people, and she observed that, and she lived a solitary life. Most of the people who were saints, through the church, so they lived solitary lives,
Yeah.
but they lived lives of this enormity of love and comprehension of love that just transcended what it is, I think, for the last 20 years. I think our culture is obsessed with, you get that
Yes.
love through another human, through sex, through having a baby, the commodification of all of those. That isn't where it's at.
Yeah.
It's some other level that we've lost sight of.
I find myself amazed sometimes when I read people like Jung. Jung at the end of his Memories, Dreams, Reflections says, I wasn't always great in relationships. I was not a nice person, but I was gripped by this. But what strikes me is that I'm reading that at the moment. I'm reading him and I'm getting sustenance so that there's a relationship that he has with humanity that extends beyond just the personal. And that happens out of solitude. So I think you're speaking to something really valuable. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. We have to stop. I appreciate it. This is great. Go on forever. Thank you.
Oh, please give us $10, please, if you can, please. And also join us at Mosaic Cafe in Masonic Street for a salon, a cup of tea. And we'll see you in September. And if you have any thoughts for me as the president, please let me know.